With his firesight, Chris saw Roland calm Ada's worries by putting a hand on her shoulder. "Let's hold up here. This is water and feed for the horses on that big yawn." As they approached, thousands of crows rose into the air, their protesting caws raising a clamor, and the wind suddenly carried the smell of death. Ada gasped. "Here? The house is burnt out, and there are dead cattle in the corrals. We've only ridden a few hours." Roland nodded at Chris's big border collie running alongside. "Exactly. The dog will have a field day gnawing on those bones, and the horses need rest and feed after we used them so hard yesterday." As they entered the place, crossing through a gate beside a cattle guard, Chris asked, "What happened to the cows?" Riding past the wooden shed row, Roland looked at the many carcasses in the corral before it. "Hard telling. Looks like they died months ago. Bones have been picked over pretty good, but Rusty will have fun gnawing on what's left." The loose horses, however, were more interested in the fresh green grass on the lawn and began to crop the tender blades hungrily. When Rusty slunk through one of the corral fences to investigate, Chris didn't call him back. Roland jumped off Indy and ran to help Ada dismount. "God damn it, Roland, quit babying me," she grumbled. "I can get off my horse by myself." But she couldn't hold back a small groan when she levered herself out of the saddle. Then she gingerly patted her swollen split lip. It must have started bleeding again. Roland wisely looked elsewhere while standing ready to take her arm. Chris hid his grin as he dismounted Shaky when they suddenly heard the distinct sounds of a dogfight coming from the loafing shed. Rusty's deep growls and snarls were answered by a lighter, yipping voice. Dropping the reins and tearing the scarf from his eyes, Chris took the axe at his belt and ran toward the sounds. Vaulting the top corral, with Roland only a step behind, he ran around the corner of the wooden shelter to find Rusty embroiled in a fight with a large coyote. Even though the snarls and growls sounded vicious, Chris could tell his big border collie was looking for a way to retreat. Stumbling over a couple of dead yearlings and clumps of dried mud, he closed in on the fighters, calling, "Back, Rusty! Back!" The coyote, her hair thin and wholly gone in several large spots, with swollen, wrinkled skin, followed for a couple of steps, then allowed the big dog to retreat. Crouched low, the scavenger bared her large white teeth, her yellow eyes shining in her pale face. Lifting his bowie knife, Roland took a threatening step toward the female, but she held her ground and snapped at him. "Oh," Roland said. "I get it, Mama." Chris, still holding his axe ready, asked, "What?" Roland carefully retreated a few steps. "She's got pups in that den, right there in the corner of the shed, see 'em?" Chris shook his head as he backed away from her as well. "I'll take your word for it." He leaned down to pat Rusty. "Don't bother her any more, all right? There are plenty of bones here to share." The dog lowered his ears and wagged his tail, but Chris had no illusions. Rusty would have to investigate this new neighbor. Ada met them at the fence, holding Chris's bow, strung and ready. "What was that? Is there a wolf in there?" Roland climbed out of the corral. "Just a coyote. She's got a bunch of pups in a corner of the shed." Curious, Ada tiptoed closer to peer through the cracks between the weathered slats. When she saw the female, she exclaimed, "Oh my gosh, that poor thing! She hardly has any hair left. The mange got her so bad." Again, her fingers went to her lip after her outburst. Roland led his horse toward a small garage, a brick building opposite the charred remains of the big house. "She's a tough old bird. It's a miracle she made it through the winter." In the early afternoon, with a cold spring wind blowing across the bent night draws, they built their camp in the wind shade of the garage and turned the horses loose. Sound of their horses peacefully cropping the new growth coming up the lawn, mixed with birds flitting through the big cottonwoods around the burnt-out house, and their cheerful spring song eased something inside Chris. Taking a deep breath, he pushed his surging Tarin down. He inhaled deeply, breathing in the fresh, clean air from the ancient mountains, using steadying energy to smooth his Tarin even more. His eyes and the scars surrounding them still burned, but he could see a little better now. Turning back to his companions, he hissed in a breath when he got a good look at Ada's face. It was easy to forget she'd been beaten so severely only the day before. Her eyes were swollen and blackened, and the split in her lip was still seeping blood. Yet even though she walked stiffly, shielding her battered ribs, she hadn't voiced a single word of complaint. Roland returned from the burnt shelf of the big house and dropped several lengths of wood beside their new fire. "Let's see what's inside that," he said, opening the garage door. When the unmistakable smell of death wafted out, Ada laughed and said, "You guys go ahead. I'll stay out here." After a pause, she added, "And close the door behind you." Inside, a small sedan and a large SUV were parked, surrounded by boxes stacked to the low ceiling. Roland and Chris walked around the vehicles to find a body seated in the sedan's driver's seat, bloated and disfigured with rot. Chris sighed. They'd encountered so much death since the power had failed. "Damn, who do you think that was?" Roland peered through the car's window, checking the interior. By his clothes and that goofy ball cap, he was a teenager. See, he's got his phone plugged into the car's power jack. Then he exclaimed, "Oh, score!" And he ran around the other side of the vehicle. Taking a deep breath and holding it, he opened the passenger door and, working swiftly, dove across the seat to reach into the back. With hasty, even frantic motions, he placed 2 large plastic bags of chips on the car's roof with a triumphant look. As Chris saw the brand names, his mouth began to water in anticipation. Ranch-flavored corn and Ripple-style potato chips. But Roland had already scrambled back into the car, digging between the seat rows. The body in the front wobbled and excreted foul fluids as Roland continued his search. When he emerged again, he held a large bottle of cheap whiskey and 2 more marked Gatorade. Chris snorted with laughter through his nose, trying to minimize his breathing. The stench was pervasive. Roland shut the vehicle's door with a thump of finality. "I ain't getting anything else out of there." With a small salute to the dead boy in the seat, he added, "Good luck with the rest, kid." He then turned to test the door handles of the SUV and found them locked. "Bring those shining eyes over here, Chris. Let's see what this one has in it." Chris chuckled and put his face against the tinted windows, allowing his Tarin to rise. He groaned as it surged immediately, wanting to escape his control and burn him away, but he held it. The SUV's interior was illuminated with a reddish glow, and they could see 2 car seats secured in the back, the area around littered with Cheerios, chips, upended sippy cups, and a baby bottle. "Well, damn it," Roland said. "I ain't hungry enough to try to gather up all those cereal bits, are you?" Chris shook his head. No." They turned their attention to the tall refrigerator standing against the back wall, still trying to breathe in shallow gasps. Roland let out a whoop of glee when they found several cases of beer had been stored inside. Quickly sorting through the ones that had frozen and split over the winter, they found 7 intact cans. Upending a box marked Quint's Clothes, they filled it with their small pile of loot. Fleeing the stinking interior, they slammed the door on the odor. Chris leaned against the doorframe, gasping for fresh, clean air and hiding his shaking knees. Even just letting the fire shine out of his eyes threatened his slippery hold on his Tarin. As he let Fremont Took's gift work inside him, euphoria filled him, and he couldn't suppress his grin. But sweat trickled down the back of his shirt as he strained to push the Tarin away. Ada exclaimed in delight over the 2 bags of chips and beer when Roland dropped the box next to the fire. He opened one of the bags, grabbed a large handful, and stuffed the crackling bits into his mouth. He took another helping and then handed the bag to Chris. Chris didn't waste any time filling his own fists with the rare treat, saying, "Go on, bro. See if we can find some grain for the horses." Leaving Ada to tend the fire and their supplies, they walked past the shed row, and crows once again rose into the air, cawing loudly. The eagles and buzzards on the carcasses in the corral were made of sterner stuff. They raised their wings threateningly, hopping over their claims. Rusty slunk through the rails, his expression showing contentment. Chris stroked the big dog's back. "You gonna share with the old bitch?" "Good boy." Passing the end of the old wooden shed, they found the cattle working area. A sizable hydraulic chute was placed under the shelter of a wide carport. The cattle alleys and holding pens were strategically placed, and with just a glance, the 2 friends recognized how easy the setup would be to work. Roland asked, What do you think happened here? Doesn't look like they were attacked like we were. Really, I don't think anyone's been here since... Chris grimaced. Hard telling. I imagine it's something like what we heard about that family up by Kirby. They had to go all the way to Denver for some kind of kid exchange, and then while they were down there, everything, cars, the power, the phones, everything, quit working. By the time they made it back home, their place had been burned and looted. Roland scoffed. Oh, I remember Pa telling us about that after their last trip to town. He looked around the devastated place. The owners accused the townsfolk of taking their stuff while they were gone. And, knowing those who were heading up things now, they probably did. But how would you prove it? What could you do about it? Chris stumbled over a pile of old hay netting beside a worn ranch pickup as Roland's words triggered a memory of his father. Bruce had always accompanied Trin, Roland's father, on those trips to deliver cattle to the townsfolk. Roland stopped and laid a hand on Chris's shoulder, heaving a deep sigh as Chris swiped burning tears from his eyes. Cursing under his breath, Chris took the sight of his father's lifeless body away and collected himself once more. The musk of the half-dried, half-rotten dead cattle filled the air as they searched around the large chute. Roland took a large plastic container, still mostly full of cattle warmer from a nail, and slung it over his shoulder by the carrying straps. Chris asked, "What do you want with that?" "Trade goods, bro. People need this more than ever now, seems they can't just get it down at the feed store anymore." A fairly new portable building stood in the corner between two corrals, and they found the key inside a dust-covered ranch pickup. Entering the building, Roland whooped triumphantly. All-purpose grain was stacked in neat 50-pound sacks against one wall, while the other was stacked high with range cubes. He found a bucket and filled it with protein cubes from one of the sacks. Grinning, Chris went out to call the horses, but they only briefly paused their grazing. When they heard the rattling bucket, though, they gave it a run. They watched them eat for a few moments, then returned to search the building. Saddles were stacked on racks, one on top of the other, and halters and bridles hung neatly from hooks. Salt and mineral blocks filled another corner. One of the shelves held more doctoring stuff, salves, antiseptics, and Chris stuffed a few of the items into his vest pocket. Closing the shed up again, Roland said, "Well, we found the tack and the feed. Where are the saddle horses?" Chris sighed. "Let's hope they were out on pasture somewhere when things went bottoms up. They're in one of these corrals. They probably starved to death like those yearlings." As they returned to their campsite, Chris looked around for his dogs, but couldn't see him anywhere. Calling as he walked across the ranch yard, he grew worried. But then he heard Ada's voice. "He's here, Chris, but he's busy right now. He ain't leaving." When they returned to where Ada was tending their small fire, Chris found his dog gleefully chewing on the entrails of a raccoon. Seeing the meat skewered above the small flames and the discarded hide, he knew immediately what had happened. "You sorry mutt. You caught a raccoon and brought it to Ada? You didn't even offer it to me." She began to laugh, but cut it short when the movement tugged at her injured lip. "Yeah, he was so proud of himself when he dropped that at my feet." Rusty hunkered down over his meal, his tail wagging softly. Chris dug in the pockets of his vest. "I brought you something too, sis." Taking the small tin can out, he tossed it into her lap. She turned it over in her hands, then opened it to reveal several curved needles attached to lengths of stout string. "Sewing twine! Thank God, where'd you find this?" With a motion toward the other side of the small ranch yard, he began to answer, but she interrupted him and grimaced. "You didn't happen to find any Novocaine?" He pulled the blindfold back up, welcoming the cooling feeling of the cloth over his hot eyes. "If I had, don't you think I would have brought it?" Roland tucked his jug of warmer next to the saddles, then saw what Ada was holding. "Oh yeah, and did you find—" Chris pulled out a hemostat from another vest pocket. Roland took it, grinned, and said, "Not bad for a blind man." Sitting beside Ada, he took her face and carefully turned it towards him. "I don't know, babe. I think that lip looks kind of sexy on you." Leveling a playful yet solid punch to his shoulder, she said, "Just stitch it up, will you?" Opening the bottle of whiskey they found, Roland urged Ada to take a couple of swallows, then began cleaning the split as well as he could. After another shot of whiskey, with Ada's talk becoming slurred, He held her face and quickly put 2 stitches in her lip. She whimpered and thrashed her legs, but managed to remain still for him. Sitting back, he inspected the injury. "I think that'll work. Looks like I got it straight." He carefully stowed the curved needle and string back in its can and picked up the liquor. Offering it to Ada, he said, "You better have some. We don't have any pain meds." A little bit drunkenly, Ada said, "You know, I think we've been here before. Not here, exactly, but on those ridges up above." She turned to Chris and added, "Don't you remember? Dad rented those snowmobiles for us, and we rode them all over this mountain." Chris nodded and shifted his gaze from the fire to the high peaks. "Oh, yeah. Over New Year's a couple years ago. Those things were so noisy, but they were a lot of fun." Roland squinted at the ridges. "I don't remember that. Where was I?" Chris answered, "Tuff had to go to your mom's for Christmas that year, and you went with him. To sunny California," he said with a teasing lilt. Ada continued, "We buzzed around up there, going from one side to the other. We got to look down on the South Fork from the top. It was beautiful." Chris smiled. "And fun. We froze by the time we finished. We loaded them up on the little trailers. Instead of heading home, Dad stopped at the Pronghorn for steaks." He chuckled and added, "He fed about $20 and a quarter into that jukebox, and we played pool on their old table." Ada smiled pensively. "And Mom bitched, saying it was getting late, but she looked the other way when Letty and I swiped sips from her beer." Tears slid down Ada's face, sparking Chris's to groan deeply in his chest as he fought to keep his own tears from spilling. Roland stayed silent, but Chris caught the grief in his friend's bowed head. Ada whispered, "She'll be all right, won't she, Chris?" She gripped Roland's hand. "And Tuff, too?" Then she cast her eyes toward the darkening sky. "And Dad. Checking out early, just when things get tricky." With a sigh, Chris said, "He's up there right now, smiling through his black beard, wolfing down a big old hamburger and fries dripping with ketchup." Roland chuckled. "From Sonic." Ada smiled even as she wiped her tears. "No, from McDonald's," Chris said, shaking his head. "He hated both of those places. Whenever we were in big towns, he took us to KFC. He skewered a piece of raccoon roasting over the fire with his knife. He held it up to the others as a toast. "Here's to you, Dad. Hope you're getting all the good stuff up there." Roland gently took the knife from Ada's shaking hands, speared a piece for her, and then one for himself. Together, they toasted the man who had shaped them all. The next morning dawned with the bright Wyoming sun peeking through a cloudy sky. They took saddles and blankets from the ranch's tack room and loaded Chloe with 2 bags of protein cubes. Indy had to endure the nuisance of carrying their packs that day, but he bore it with hardly a turned ear. Just as they were ready to mount, Chris took his rope from his saddle. Roland said, "Come on, bro, let's go." "Give me a minute, I'll be right there." Chris, the bandage for his eyes hanging just below his winter beard, ran to the doctoring area. Hurrying, he filled several syringes with anti-parasitic medication. Returning to his friends, he handed them to Ada. "Might as well help me," he said, and climbed through the corral rails. Ada held the syringes and called, "Help you? With what? Dude, what are you doing?" The musty odor of the dead cattle filled his nose as Chris quietly stalked past the end of the shed row, but Roland answered for him. I know what he's doing." When Ada inquired again, Roland shushed her. "Just come to the fence. Be ready." Chris prepared his loop while peeking around the corner of the old wooden building. The aged coyote mama lay in front of her den, guarding her pups. He knew he would only get one chance at a catch, so he calculated the odds in his mind and hoped he was right. Stepping forward swiftly, he launched his rope in one motion. By luck, she jumped away from him precisely as he anticipated, and as the lariat settled over her, he quickly pulled his slack. Ignoring her frightened squeaks, Roland settled his own rope on her. Keeping the lariats tight, he pinned her down, sitting on her back and holding her head immobile with gloved hands. Chris ran to retrieve the medication from Ada while directing Rusty to stay out of the way. Working as fast as he could, he reached into the den and took the little squeaking pups one by one. The little wide-eyed babies growled at him fiercely with their high-pitched voices and tried to sink their tiny teeth into his gloves. Even as quickly as he handled them, he could plainly see the terrible fleas thick in their soft fur. He squirted the precious wormer over them, tossed aside the only dead pup, and then put the others back in the den. When he moved over to their mother, Roland held her steady. Taking the biggest syringe, he squirted her back evenly with the anti-parasitic. Coordinating their movements, they turned her loose and backed off. She recovered quickly and snapped with a snarl at her attackers. Rusty raced to interject himself, but Ada told him to leave it, and the big dog instead went to Chris's side. Laughing at each other as they exited the corral, they watched the old bitch retreat, tending to her pups. "You know," Roland said, fixing Chris with a glance from under the brim of his black cowboy hat, "they might be cute little whelps now, but in about a year they're going to be big gnarly coyotes, bent on attacking humans when they can." He gestured at the mama and added, "Hell, I don't know why she's not coming after us now." Chris closed his eyes as his Tarins surged inside him, trying to break out and burn him away, but with a few breaths he got it under control. He picked up his own hat from where it had fallen and clamped it down tight, then put the cooling blindfold over his eyes again. "I know. Haven't you had enough of death?" He gestured all around the place. "Dead cattle, dead horses, broken kid who thought his phone could save him." He mounted Sour Patch and legged him into a walk. "Today, at least, there can be life." They crossed from cow pasture to cow pasture at a steady climb, often moving away from the stream to find a gate. Allowing the loose horses, Shaky, Indy, and Clory, to graze along the way, they laughed at the newborn calves playing in the greening flats. The beauty of the clear spring day dazzled. Deep green pastures interspersed with tiny yellow and white flowers, large cottonwoods along the rivulet just putting out new leaves, the birds flitting to and fro, loudly proclaiming that spring had arrived, and above it all the deep blue sky. Chris followed the others with the blindfold over his eyes, his firesight enabling him to see their warm forms, and the salty scent of the horses filling his nostrils. But in rare moments, when his Tarins seemed truly quiet, he lowered the thick cloth to be able to watch their progress. Ada, saying she thought she recognized a little two-track path, led them out of the creek bottom onto a high ridge. They followed the dirt track, with the horse's breath coming in sharp gasps. Eventually they clambered to a high, treeless mountain flat, and the horses and riders stood just past the edge, gathering their breath in the thin air. For about an hour they continued to climb, as high-elevation winds fiercely defended the mountain top, dotted with last winter's snows, until they reached the other side. Constantly fighting with his broken Tarin, the surging of the flames that strove to engulf him, Chris kept his eyes covered, even though he heard Ada and Roland's surprised exclamations. Roland said, "Is that smoke going up from all the horses along that river?" Ada's answering sigh was heavy. "Yeah. As far as I can tell, just about every single house is burning." Roland added, "Not every single one, but most. Even all those along the little subdivision next to the lake." Chris lowered the cloth, but his swollen eyes could not make out details that far away. He refastened it and smelled the smoke carried on the western winds. Ada guided her horse along the ridge. "We better find a spot to ride off this cliff." Then she added, "Why can't people just leave each other alone?" Roland followed her, and as he passed Chris, he asked, "Are you sure we have to go down there? Maybe we better go up to Cody first and then see where you have to go." Chris fell in at Roland's side. "That's northeast of here. If I go east or south at all, I won't make it. North will work, and west is okay." His gloved hand shook as he took his cowboy hat off. Under its sheltering brim, the scars across his face were swollen and painful. Roland took his bow from its scabbard and strung it. Laying it across his saddle, he said, "I don't suppose you can see that mess down there, can you?" "No, didn't think so." Chris replaced his hat as Roland trotted ahead. He breathed deeply as Sour Patch followed Pinky and Skelton, trying to stop his Tarin surges. He would make it to that waterfall. He only hoped he wasn't already too late. They found a place to ride down, but it was just as steep as the ascent had been. As they led the mounts down the boulder-strewn meadow, Rusty continued to be in charge of the loose horses, proving his worth. Descending steadily, they found a game trail that followed a gurgling stream into a thick stand of towering pines. Cold clouds gathered in the west, and soon a spring storm pelted them with rain and sleet. After another hour, Roland stopped and said, "There's a good little meadow by the creek here. Horses will have plenty to eat with the spring grass, and as tired as they are, they won't go far. And we can string our tarp onto those trees at the edge." Making camp in the gathering twilight, Roland said, "Hey, Mr. Firebug, you sure you can't light some of this wet kindling up for us?" Chris showed Roland his empty hands, shrugged, and helped Ada get out the hard jerky sticks and half a bag of corn chips for dinner. As evening fell, wind snapping the tarp, they huddled under the blankets, listening to the horses cropping grass with contentment. At dawn, after a bitterly cold night, they caught, saddled, and packed the horses in tense silence. Smoke still rose from the burnt houses, the wind driving it east. Roland swung his leg over Pinky and gathered up his reins. "Are you sure we have to go down there?" Mounting shaky for the day, Chris answered, "Well, if we don't, you might get a lot of fire, all at once, and not in that comfy hand-warming way." They followed a game trail by the creek until the pines thinned to scattered thickets. They stayed along the forest line, unwilling to drop down into the wide open pasture. From the wasted valley below, where many of the larger houses still burned, faint shouts and ragged screams echoed. Roland stopped in the shelter of a peculiar rock formation. "What do you want to do? Crossing leaves us exposed for miles." Ada, beside him, studied the valley below and cursed under her breath. Chris held up his hand. "Quiet." He sensed with his gut that another Tarin was very close. Dropping his blindfold to hang around his neck, he gestured for them to wait and urged Shaky forward. "Wait here. I gotta check something out." Protesting, Roland said, "What the heck? At least take your seeing-eye dog with you." When Chris only laughed, Roland growled, "Ah, hell. I better go with him. He'll never find his way back here." Ignoring him, Chris rode towards the other Tarin. He rounded another stand of pines, and his gaze fell on a young woman. Even to his sore eyes, the scars on her face, mirroring his own, glowed a slightly violet hue. Her short, purple hair rippled in the wind as she sat astride a flea-bit mare. Most strikingly, her thickened waist hinted at a pregnancy, juxtaposed to the valley's violence. Their gazes met, and Chris felt the fire within calm slightly. Caution forgotten, he approached. A stout man with Native American features, astride a lanky blue roan, joined her, but held back at her signal. Her swollen belly brushed the saddle horn as she guided her mare closer. Remembering Jesselin's formality, Chris said, "Tarin?" The lady's reply was almost a declaration rather than a simple returned greeting. "Focus!" He sighed and rubbed a hand over the swollen scars across his brow and cheeks. From his dreams, he knew he was the fire focus, of course, but that didn't mean he had to like it. Nodding his acknowledgement, he said, "What brings you here, Tarin?" With a gesture toward the burning houses along the river, he added, "Today's not a good day in this valley." The other man, the one in the flashy roan, rode closer, saying, "No joke, genius. We've been sent to fetch you, and you land us right in the middle of this wreck. You better have an excellent explanation for not getting up to the waterfall yet." Rusty, alerted by the aggressive words, slunk from the edge of the thick woods to come to Chris's side, his teeth bared and a low rumble in his throat. Roland also closed the distance, saying, "We're going to call that none of your business. Why don't you take your useless, ill-trained nag back a few steps? My brother wants to talk to your little Tarin chick." The purple-haired girl legged her small mare forward, pulled the glove off her hand, and extended it for Chris to shake. "I am Megan Nosing, Spirit Tarin. My friend here is Adam Whiteman, our guard leader." Answering her small gesture of decorum, he stripped his leather glove off, but when their fingers touched, he gasped as her Tarin washed over him. Her power rose to cover his, like a heavy towel draped over the top of a sloshing water tank. One moment, he fought to keep his Tarin from surging out of his control, and the next, he was slumped over his saddle horn in relief. When he opened his eyes to look at her, he saw her violet eyes regarding him with smug satisfaction. When she released him, he bared his teeth in a fierce grin, turning his palm as he tried to bring the flames to his call once more, but he remained empty. Though his Tarin felt controlled, he could not bring a single flame out of his core. Leaning from the saddle, she gently closed his fingers and said, "I can't bring all of it back. You have to go to Freymatuk for that. But I will help you get there. And so will Adam." His burning eyes had been eased, and the scars around them were no longer throbbing. He smiled at her and her guard. "Wait here. We need to talk this over. I'll be right back." They met Ada only a short distance away, where Roland threw up his hands. "You're just going to go with them? 'Cause you held her hand for 5 seconds?" He gestured at the carnage in the valley. "What if they did all that?" Chris removed his cowboy hat, tilting his face to the clear and sunny sky. The warm light brought an overdue sense of relief. "They didn't," he said with a quiet certainty. "It's hard to explain, but I know they had nothing to do with it." His fingers brushed the scars on his brow and across his cheeks. For the first time in days, they were not swollen and hot. "Roland, I thought I had waited too long. I wasn't going to make it." He gestured at the Tarin waiting, her guard by her side. "She can help me, and I'll go with her." Roland turned to Ada, frustration in his voice. "Your brother found another scar-faced chick, and now he's already head over heels, wants to follow her like a dog on a friggin' leash." Ada leaned back to view the other 2 riders. "She really pregnant?" Roland scoffed and said, "And your brother is already puttying her hands." Ada grinned at Chris with a sympathetic look and said, "Well, she's got the scars and the weird eyes, although they're not blue like Jesselyn's were." She turned to Chris. "Purple? What kind of Tarin would that be? What does she do?" "I don't know all of it," Chris lied, "but she's a spirit Tarin, and I know she can help me get to that waterfall I've been dreaming of." Roland scoffed. "Puppies and rainbows, Chris. Look at the valley down there, all those burning houses. For all I know, they're the ones that did that." Ada listened to her bow, but then turned her eyes on Chris. "And you want to go with them?" Hat still in his hands, Chris said, "Ada, look at me. Look at my scars. Heck, even my eyes are calmer than they have been for days." Then, with a shake of his head, he added, "When I looked for you, Letty, and Miss Coral inside that burning house, I got cooked, literally." He ran his fingertips over the scars again, adding, "I didn't think I was going to make it, sis. I was going to burn long before I could get to that waterfall." Roland said, "And now you think some pregnant lady's going to help you? Dude, you're crazy." Fixing his gaze on Roland, Chris said, "You should go back. Mama and Trin, Letty and Tuff, they still need you. Mama and Tuff especially. You should go home now to help Trin rebuild." He paused momentarily, then added, "And tell them not to build a home place. It won't be enough. Tell them to build a fort." Ada began shaking her head, but Roland was the one who answered. "Like they don't know that already? No, He stopped to look at Ada, amending his answer. Me and Ada will come with you. Pointing a finger at Chris, he added pointedly, but we all promised to come back. Better remember that. Chris would have insisted, but he knew what his dreams said. Roland would stay by his side, and Ada would stay with Roland. So he spoke to his dog, directing him to bring the horses, then turned to meet up with the spirit Tarin and her guard. And even though the path through the tall pines took him southwest, his Tarin stayed calm. Hope rose inside him. He might make it. The two riders turned their horses about and led up the valley, but after only a short distance, 5 more men rode out through the pines to join them. Everyone visibly bristled as they approached each other. Roland stopped his horse. Whoa. We agreed to come with the Tarin lady, not all of you. Adam's gaze went from Ada's bruised face to Roland, then directed his words at Chris. Well, Mr. Focus, he sneered, the title dripping with scorn. If you let your sister be treated like that, I say we leave you here and take our chances with Fremont Took. We'll find a new Focus. Megan tried to calm her guards with a wave of her hand, but Roland looked at Ada and said, What? No, I didn't do that. He advanced on the other man and leaned in menacingly, loudly whispered, I rescued her from the men who did that to her, moron. Chris said to Megan, We both rescued her? While Ada declared loudly toward the men, Roland didn't do this. I about killed the guy who did. The guards up front vanished as quickly as it had come, and they started laughing as they took up protective positions around Chris's party and Megan to continue up the trail. Adam chuckled and held out a fist at Chris, who thumped it with his own, wearing a hesitant grin. We don't stand for that kind of thing, the tall man said. Then, in an obvious effort to break the tension, he watched Rusty as the dog loped around the loose horses behind them, ears laid back and eyes shining. Laughing, he said, Look at that dog. That's a handy thing for him to know. Accepting the peace offering, Chris guided Shaky after the dark-skinned rider, his hesitant grin broadening into a real one. He thinks bothering the horses is all kinds of fun. And, we'll just let him, right? A wide sagebrush-covered pasture separated them from the meandering riverbed below, and the group followed a cow trail along the edge of the forested mountainside. The multitude of smoking ranchettes clearly worried their guards as they watched the action in the valley with sharp eyes. Megan guided her older mare to flank Chris and Shaky, indicating a spot in the western distance. We have a partner location just a few miles from here, but they were attacked yesterday, along with everyone else in this valley. We left most of our guards to help defend it. We need their ranch. It's in a great location at a stopover point, and they have promised to use their irrigated meadows to grow things we need these days. Chris looked over the war-torn valley below him and asked, Well, who's doing this? Who would just burn all these places? Megan sighed heavily and patted her mare's sleek neck. This fight is over the irrigation system to all those little hayfields. That's the only place where enough corn and wheat can be grown to feed everyone. Right now, it looks like the North Fork Coalition will get control of them. See that one that isn't burning? Has those 2 plastic-covered round buildings? Well, the owners of that are Mormon, and they really want to be with the Cody folk. But the North Fork Coalition needs it to feed their people. Chris's gaze followed her gesture and found the place. 2 greenhouses covered in white plastic were surrounded by several sizable patches of radiant flower beds. Once more, he was glad that she had calmed his Tarin. Only an hour prior, he wouldn't have been able to see the small figures of men armed with bows and spears walking around the small holding, its modest residence, and the pile of bikes lying in the farmyard. Megan lowered her gaze to her reins, adjusting the one that hung too long. Observing her clumsy movements, he noted her limited riding skills. Once more, he questioned why she was riding at all, especially in her condition. She groaned and stood in her stirrups, saying, Really, I don't know how you guys can sit on a horse for so long. It's killing my butt. He tried, but failed to hide his chuckle.
You get used to it, he said before adding, "We'd heard the Mormons have gained a lot of influence in the Cody area." She nodded. "They've been preparing for their tribulation, stocking their basements and even practicing beforehand. They think this is it. And, of course, there are a bunch of people on their doorstep demanding they share out of the goodness of their hearts. Can you blame them for making those people join their club?" She grimaced wryly. "I totally get it, but on the other hand, they've been getting very powerful that way." She kicked her little mare up to a trot to catch up with the riders ahead, and Chris wondered how their headquarters camp dealt with the new people looking for a safe place for their families. Reining Shaky to keep pace with her, he figured that he'd find out soon enough. Wind from the west blew against them with the sharp scent of toxic, plastic-filled flames. Riding beside her, he asked the question he'd been thinking about since he first knew who she was. "Has a water Tarin named Jessalyn Turner arrived at your headquarters yet? She was supposed to go up to Cody to meet up with her dad, and she was planning on seeing her mother and Powell." Megan sighed apologetically and shook her head. "I know of her. She was at your place for a few weeks. She got stuck in Cody. Her and a couple others." Before Chris could ask more, Adam gestured for them to speed up. "They're under attack again! Come on!" Without another word, the tall Indian urged his blue gelding into a run. The sound of shod hooves pounding the hard ground mixed with the creak of saddles as the group thundered down the open slope. Below, beside the blacktop road, a wind devil spiraled high beside a cluster of buildings. It twisted through the cottonwoods, hurling sticks, branches, and even old logs with relentless force. Trusting Shaky to find sure footing, he looked up at the sunny sky with a few high clouds and recognized the twisting force from his dream. An air Terran was at work. He wrenched his eyes away from the chilling sight, searching for Megan and answers. When he spotted her, he cursed under his breath. She was peeling ahead, hunched over and clinging to the saddle horn, barely staying mounted as her mare barreled down the slope, one rein trailing loose. The horse's ears were pinned back in a determination to follow one guard running down the hill. When the mare leapt over a small patch of sage, Megan let out a panicked cry, bouncing high in the saddle before luck brought her back down. Chris urged Shaky to lengthen his strides until he reached Megan's side. Still at a dead run, he leaned down and caught the loose rein. Softly and evenly, Shaky pushed the mare sideways into a large circle, easing their pace until he brought them into a smooth and even stop. Megan's breath persisted as frightened gasps, but her grip on the saddle horn grew steadier. Glancing over his shoulder, he saw Ada, Roland, and 6 of the guards approaching a red pasture gate, the 3 loose horses following behind. One guard opened it without slowing, and the others followed close behind. "You're all right, girl," he said gently, not knowing if his words were meant for the horse or her rider. "Let go of the saddle horn, Megan. Get a hold of your reins, and for Pete's sake, put your feet back in the stirrups." At the base of the slope, Chris recognized the other's strategy, reminiscent of tactics from online multiplayer games. They moved in a line, veering frequently as they silently loosed arrows at the attackers. Their plan was apparent: clear the field of enemies before advancing to the beleaguered ranch. He muttered into the snatching wind, "Damn it, you guys. Just remember, you can't respawn this time." With Megan's mare more willing to cooperate, Chris turned to the intense scene. Ada, flanked by Roland and Adam, drew her bow with ease, firing as she passed the attackers. Her movements were fluid, standing tall in Clory's stirrups as she knocked another arrow and loosed it at a man fleeing toward the clustered buildings. Roland timed his shots to follow hers, their teamwork seamless. From the corner of his eye, Chris noticed Rusty pacing anxiously, his ears pointed and trained on the fight. "Get him!" Chris exclaimed. "Protect Ada!" Rusty charged ahead, faster than Chris could manage with Megan in tow. Chris sighed, relieved by the help, but frustrated by his inability to join. Megan was still trembling, and he couldn't abandon her. For now, he could only watch Roland and Ada, the men with them, wreak havoc on the attackers. He would have to wait for her to calm down and regain control of her own mount. The whirlwind dominated the area, growing and gaining speed. Its force was incredible. Every few seconds, a small pile of ground erupted under it, flinging dirt, rocks, cracking small boulders in its path. Laden with debris, it churned across the river and onto the bluffs, leveling everything before it. Old cottonwoods and small bushes were obliterated. Screams could be heard as it roiled over the hidden assailants. When he saw the men holding crossbows on the bluff above the ranch, he laughed when he realized the whirlwind would churn them to pieces as well. The raiders scrambled in retreat, fleeing toward a pile of bikes on the blacktop. Beside him, Megan hiccuped with small sobs, still shaken. He was relieved to see that she had her stirrups again. Though he still held one of the reins, Megan had gathered the other, clutching it to the saddle horn. He turned on her, voice sharp. "What the hell, Megan? What made you decide you could keep up with that? And your guards? Some kind of protectors? None of them happen to remember that you can't ride a friggin' stick horse to water?" Leading her mare at a fast walk with an occasional trot, Chris pressed on, eager to reach the ranch and frustrated he might arrive after the fight was over. "Can you keep control of your mare now?" he asked, handing back the rein and moving forward. "Make sure she follows right on my horse's butt," he added over his shoulder. Ahead, Roland, Ada, and Megan's guards sprinted toward the ranch yard as the whirlwind shifted direction, churning back toward them. Even from a distance, he could see and hear their jubilant laughter. This battle was all over, but Rusty was still in the thick of the attackers, tearing through men with unrelenting ferocity. "Rusty! Call Rusty!" he murmured desperately, hoping his friend or sister would hear his thoughts. "He's gonna get ate!" He sighed in relief as Roland's voice rang out, calling the big dog back. Rusty broke off, his current target limping away in retreat, fleeing the teeth of the dog as well as the maelstrom. Close enough, Chris felt the presence of the two Tarins wielding such destruction. "Man, I thought my fire was badass," he muttered. Suddenly, the wind devil dissipated. Rocks and gravel fell to the earth as the force faded. Yet the rumbling thumps continued, tossing another line of armed assailants into the air. Defenders darted between buildings, seizing moments to shoot. Though a few silent arrows found their mark, the attackers retreated to the heap of bicycles on the highway. His shoulder stung as a small hand hit it. Having secured her seat in the saddle, Megan had reached his side and was glaring angrily at him. "What?" he said, not wanting to look away from the Taryn's talon. "Stop it!" she growled. "You quit your whining right now." Taken aback, he turned his fiery eyes on her. "Whining? What are you talking about? I'm not whining." Indicating the men below, he said, "You had 6 guards with you, and none of them could be bothered to help you in trouble?" He scoffed. "What are they guarding you for? Some imaginary boogeyman? They left you, Megan, and I saved you, but you're telling me to stop whining?" He scoffed again and returned his attention to the fight, but it was over. As the assaulting force retreated to their bikes, he saw the defenders gathering before a large metal building, high-fiving and thumping each other's backs as they celebrated the victory. And here he was, slowly catching up, keeping pace with the pregnant woman beside him. As he led them through the ranch yard gate, Megan cried, "Stop, Chris!" He turned, shaky, his reluctance showing, and growled, "What?" She rode closer and rested her hand on his shoulder. Even through the thick layers of his heavy shirt and leather vest, he could feel her calming his Tarin. "The right man helped me," she hissed, keeping her voice low. "You can't fight." She shook her head, short mauve hair twirling about her face. "You can't get killed. There are too many fire Tarins waiting for you, barely hanging on to their humanity right now, ready to burn to cinders at the slightest provocation." She stopped and breathed calmness into her words. "You have to take your place as their focus. You're the only one who can help them." Turning away from his angered gaze, she added, "And I'm the one that can help you get there." Sarcasm dripped from his voice as he answered, "Are you serious? Believe it or not, I might, maybe, be a fair shot with my bow." He put a hand on one of the axes secured at his belt. "And I have been known to use these. Once, maybe even twice." Steel entered his voice. "Your so-called guards, they hung you out to dry. At the speed we were going, things don't break. They go frickin' splat." Bending across his saddle horn, he fought the Tarin that threatened to overwhelm his control without her touch. She closed in on him, and when she laid her hand on his cheek, he felt hers like a heavy blanket. Same as it was when they first touched. You can help a bad rider handle her horse. An involuntary shudder rocked her, and she took her hand away, urging the white mare toward the ranch buildings. Moving swiftly, he closed the gate the others had left open in their haste. Whatever. Riding into the ranch yard, a place dominated by a large metal building that could only be an indoor arena, Chris approached the two other Tarins. They were surrounded by men slapping their shoulders in appreciation of their power. Guiding Shaky through the small crowd, Chris rode close and leaned down to put his hand on the Earth Tarin's shoulder. Including the Air Tarin with his gaze, he exclaimed, "I saw all that from up above. You guys rocked!" Still surrounded by their admirers, they grinned back, and the Air Tarin said, "Thank you, Focus. Can't wait to work with you and yours. It's going to be epic." Chris's group also received congratulations as they rode into the yard. Their harrying of the outlying attackers had helped to break the assault, and the people from the ranch were grateful. Even Chris's dog received admiring looks, although he almost got in a fight with one of the local ranch dogs. A teenage girl, tight jeans cinched around her slim waist with a bling-studded belt, took a glossy Australian shepherd by the collar and led him away. An older Mexican man paused from giving orders to some other ranch hands and grinned as he shook the Tarin's hand. "We would have done all right, but there would be a lot more of us dead amongst the brush. You guys get the Top Hand of the Day award for sure." Turning to Megan, he said, "So, you found our missing Focus. Well done. How is he doing? Is he in as bad shape as the others?" He spoke English with a Spanish lilt that indicated he'd been raised as an American, and he didn't wait for an answer as he turned to Roland and Ada. "I am Guillermo Garcia." He gave orders to a couple of helpers to take the horses and put them up. Turning back to his visitors, he added, "Welcome to the Crewback Ranch. The owners were overseas when everything went to crap, so you need anything, you come to me." As Megan dismounted, she stopped his flurry of words and instructions. "Guillermo, we won't spend the night. We will take the Focus as far as we can. Every minute counts for those waiting for him." The ranch manager paused his deluge. "Damn, Megan. Are you taking all your men with you? This little fiasco is not done yet. They will come back to try again. And if they find out I no longer have you guys here..." He trailed off at Megan's determined grimace and simply said, "Come, into my office, and we'll discuss how we both go forward from here." With an apologetic smile, Megan nodded and handed her reins to Chris, following the older man to the indoor arena. Chris sat his horse in the middle of the celebration, reins to the white mare in his hands, while the others gave him a wide berth. Soon, Megan and Guillermo returned from their negotiation, and the older Mexican began giving another string of orders. Food was to be brought, and horses were to be changed. Megan found Adam, and after a short discussion, the dark-skinned man rode away to give his own orders. When Megan approached Chris, Roland and Ada left their exuberant companions to hear the plan. Fixing each of them with a look, the purple-haired lady said, "We've traded most of our men to stay and defend this place. We will take 2 of the best archers, but leave the Tarins. In exchange, they'll provide us each with 2 fresh, sturdy mountain horses." Turning to Chris, she added, "Guillermo has offered to let your ranch horses rest here for a couple of weeks. Once we're home, we'll send more fighters to help secure this place, and he can send your mounts after. Or he can wait till someone goes that way and send them back to your place in Grass Creek." Just as Ada, Roland, and Chris began to shake their heads at this proposition, Adam approached. The tall man still rode his leggy gray and leaned from the saddle to say, "You should take him up on that. Guillermo's a good guy. You can trust him. And you've used your horses hard in the last few days. They look like gutted sparrows." Just as Roland loaded up to deliver one of his scathing comments, Chris held up his hand. "No, our horses come with us. They can eat as we go." Disparagingly, Adam shook his head. "Suit yourself. But if they slow us down, we will leave them." A large lunch, fresh salad greens, radishes, and small carrots, along with roast beef sandwiches, was laid out on the picnic table, and they were invited to eat while preparations continued. They visited with the 2 Tarins and the other guards as they ate, and they watched the horse ranch's hands change saddles. Chris's rig was secured on a big-headed, half-draft sorrel. As the young girl struggled to adjust the cinches, Chris rose, took another swipe of the delicious salsa, and stuffed it into his mouth, saying, "I'd better help her with that." Roland dipped another homemade corn chip into the big bowl. "I'll leave her. She figures it out. She might just learn something." Hesitant, but agreeing with Roland's logic, Chris sat down and picked up his thick sandwich, watching her. Eventually, the girl succeeded in saddling the horse, but when it came to the bridle, sized for the smaller Shaky, she simply hung it on the saddle horn before moving on to prepare another mount. Roland laughed. "She'll figure that one out next time, I guess." Only an hour later, Roland, Ada, and Chris followed Megan and her original 6 guards, plus 2 archers, up the next leg of their journey. Each man led a spare mount. 4 pack horses, heavily laden with supplies, had been distributed amongst them, while Rusty brought their 6 ranch horses, loose, so they'd graze when able, as the long line of riders passed the damage left by that terrible wind devil and headed across the river. Adam led them at a swift pace, trotting over the easy parts until eventually their trail entered a steep canyon. Megan, shifting in the saddle frequently to ease her bulky middle, rode just ahead of Chris and assured the 3 that this was the easiest way to reach that waterfall.
Wyoming Tarins rising, heading northwest. This was a story from the Wyoming Tarin Rising series, and we want to thank you sincerely for pressing the like button. It's like you just gave us a little nod, a virtual toast with your coffee cup, and it makes our day. Heading Northwest was narrated by Camon and written by Ashakery and is copyrighted on May 26th, 2025. And we want to thank our editor, Victoria Stormson. Hopefully, we'll have another one ready for you soon, so be sure to subscribe and check for updates.